Discover the 10 beverages mentioned throughout the Bible, from the wine at Cana to the milk and honey of the Promised Land, supported by archaeological evidence and historical research. The Bible mentions beverages over 200 times. Wine appears in the first miracle of Jesus. Milk and honey describe the Promised Land. Vinegar was offered to Christ on the cross. But what were these drinks actually like? Were they similar to what we drink today or completely different? Archaeologists have uncovered ancient wine cellars in biblical-era palaces. Researchers have analyzed residues from pottery jars. Historians have translated Babylonian and Egyptian texts describing drink preparation. We now know what ancient Israelites actually consumed, not speculation but evidence from artifacts, scripture, and ancient records. If you value historical accuracy about biblical life, subscribe to Rooted Knowledge. We're exploring what ancient people actually experienced, grounded in archaeology and scripture. Let's begin. 1. Wine, yayin. Wine was the most important beverage in ancient Israel. It appears over 140 times in scripture, from Noah planting the first vineyard after the flood to Jesus turning water into wine at Cana. This wasn't grape juice. The Hebrew word yayin specifically refers to fermented wine. The climate of ancient Israel made fermentation inevitable. Grapes crushed in the morning would begin fermenting by evening in the Mediterranean heat. Archaeological evidence confirms wine's centrality. In 2013, archaeologists discovered a massive wine cellar at Tel Kabri in northern Israel, a palace wine storage containing 40 large jars, each holding 50 liters. This 3,700-year-old cellar could store 2,000 liters of wine. Historical context: wine was safer than water. Alcohol killed bacteria, usually diluted with water, 2-3 parts water to 1 part wine. Lower alcohol content than modern wine, 4-7% versus 12-15%. Spiced with honey, herbs, or resins for flavor and preservation. Essential for celebrations, religious ceremonies, and daily meals. The Bible's attitude toward wine is nuanced. It's called a blessing that gladdens the heart, Psalm 104:15, yet drunkenness is consistently condemned. Priests on duty couldn't drink wine, Leviticus 10:9. Nazirites abstained completely during their vows, Numbers 6:3. Wine symbolized joy, prosperity, and God's blessing. When the prophets described the coming messianic age, they spoke of mountains dripping with wine, Joel 3:18, Amos 9:13. The wine at the Last Supper, the wine at Cana, the wine Noah made, all were fermented, diluted, and integral to ancient Israelite life. 2. Strong drink, shekar. Shekar appears frequently in scripture, usually paired with wine and strong drink. But what was it? The Hebrew root shekar means to be or become drunk, which tells us shekar was intoxicating. But it wasn't distilled liquor. Distillation wasn't invented until medieval times. Shekar was a comprehensive term for fermented beverages made from anything except grapes. This included date wine, pomegranate wine, barley beer, honey wine, apple cider, and other fruit-based fermented drinks. Evidence from scripture and history. Numbers 28:7 uses shekar as a drink offering, likely date wine. Song of Solomon 8:2 mentions pomegranate wine specifically. Archaeological evidence shows barley beer was common in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Ancient texts describe honey wine mead throughout the region. Date wine was probably the most common shekar. Palm trees flourished throughout ancient Israel, and Assyrian Babylonian cuneiform tablets frequently mention date. 3. Water, mayim. Water seems ordinary, but in ancient Israel's arid climate, it was precious and often scarce. The Bible frequently mentions wells, springs, and cisterns, essential infrastructure for survival. Abraham's servants fought over wells, Genesis 21:25. Isaac's servants dug wells and named them, Genesis 26:19-22. Moses met his wife at a well, Exodus 2:15-16. Jesus met the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, John 4:6. Sources of water. Springs, most reliable, like Gihon Spring in Jerusalem. Wells, dug deep to reach groundwater. Cisterns, carved into rock to collect rainwater. Rivers, Jordan River, though limited in ancient Israel. Water quality was a constant concern. Not all sources were safe to drink. Stagnant water in cisterns could harbor bacteria. This partly explains why wine and diluted wine were preferred. The alcohol made water safer to consume. The Bible uses water symbolically for purification, cleansing, and spiritual life. But practically, water was a daily challenge requiring significant labor. Women typically carried water from wells or springs in jars on their heads, heavy, time-consuming work. During drought or siege, water scarcity became desperate. The prophets spoke of water as God's blessing and its absence as judgment. Clean, fresh water from a spring was considered a luxury. Most people drank water that had sat in cisterns or jars, often mixed with wine for safety and palatability. 4. Milk shalav. Milk in ancient Israel wasn't the refrigerated, pasteurized product we know today. It came primarily from goats and sheep, sometimes from cows. The phrase, "a land flowing with milk and honey," appears repeatedly in Scripture, describing the Promised Land's abundance. This wasn't metaphorical. Milk represented prosperity and pastoral wealth. Biblical milk reality. Fresh milk spoiled within hours in the heat. Goats produced milk only part of the year after giving birth. Most milk was quickly processed into curds, yogurt, or cheese. Sour milk or curdled milk was more common than fresh. The Hebrew has distinct words for fresh milk and soured milk. Soured milk, like modern yogurt or kefir, was actually preferred, more refreshing, lasted longer, and easier to digest. When Abraham served the three visitors in Genesis 18:8, he gave them curds and milk, likely referring to different preparations of fermented milk products. Milk was stored in goatskin bottles where it naturally thickened and soured due to bacteria in the skin. This wasn't spoilage. It was the normal state of milk in ancient times. Deborah praised Jael for giving Sisera milk when he asked for water, and curds in a lordly bowl, Judges 5:25. This hospitality detail shows both fresh and soured milk products were valued. Milk symbolized abundance, nourishment, and the goodness of the land. Job spoke of God's blessings as being bathed in cream and having streams of olive oil, Job 29:6. Pastoral prosperity imagery. 5. Vinegar shomets. Vinegar in ancient times wasn't a cooking ingredient, it was a beverage. When wine or beer was exposed to air, bacteria converted alcohol to acetic acid, creating vinegar. This wasn't always intentional, but the ancients recognized vinegar's uses. Biblical references. Ruth dipped her bread in vinegar during harvest, Ruth 2:14. Soldiers offered Jesus vinegar on the cross, Matthew 27:48. Nazarites were forbidden even vinegar made from wine, Numbers 6:3. Why drink vinegar? In ancient Israel's heat, vinegar mixed with water created a refreshing, thirst-quenching drink. Roman soldiers carried posca, vinegar diluted with water and sometimes herbs, as their standard beverage. It was cheaper than wine, didn't spoil, and prevented dehydration better than plain water. The vinegar offered to Jesus on the cross was likely this soldier's posca, not an act of mockery, but a common drink. Some scholars interpret it as a small mercy, offering something to wet parched lips. Vinegar's sourness made it valuable for dipping bread. Ruth's lunch of bread dipped in vinegar was a normal worker's meal. The acidity complemented the plain bread. The process was simple. Leave wine or beer open to air, and within days or weeks it became vinegar. Since storage methods were imperfect, accidental vinegar production was common. 6. Honey drink davash. When the Bible mentions honey, it usually means date honey, thick syrup made from dates, not bee honey. Date palms flourished in ancient Israel, especially around Jericho, called the City of Palms. Date honey was produced by boiling down date fruit, creating a sweet syrup similar to molasses. Honey-based beverages. Honey mixed with water, simple sweetened drink. Honey wine, fermented date honey. Wine sweetened with honey, common practice. Honey mixed with milk, mentioned in Song of Solomon 4:11. Archaeological evidence in ancient texts confirm honey drinks were common throughout the ancient Near East. The Babylonians made beer sweetened with date honey. The Egyptians made honey wine. The land flowing with milk and honey likely referred to goat's milk and date honey, the two products representing pastoral and agricultural abundance. Honey date syrup was also mixed with wine for flavor and medicinal purposes. Ancient texts describe wine-honey mixtures used for invalids and special occasions. Bee honey existed but was rarer and more expensive. Wild honey, like what John the Baptist ate in the wilderness, was collected from wild bee nests, but date honey was the everyday sweetener. When Scripture forbids offering honey on the altar, Leviticus 2:11, it specifically refers to date honey, which would ferment when heated, inappropriate for grain offerings. 7. Pomegranate wine. Song of Solomon 8:20 specifically mentions the juice of my pomegranate, interpreted by scholars as pomegranate wine. Pomegranates grew abundantly in ancient Israel and were one of the 7 species characterizing the land, Deuteronomy 8:8. The fruit's juice could be consumed fresh, but like grape juice, it fermented quickly in the heat. Pomegranate beverage uses fresh juice briefly available during harvest, fermented pomegranate wine, pomegranate syrup boiled down like grenadine, mixed with grape wine for flavor. The process mirrored grape wine production. Pomegranates were crushed, the juice collected, and fermentation occurred naturally. The result was a tart, slightly sweet wine with lower alcohol content than grape wine. Pomegranate wine appears in ancient Near Eastern texts as a luxury item. It was more expensive than grape wine because pomegranates yielded less juice and required more fruit. The symbolic use in Song of Solomon suggests pomegranate wine was associated with romance, celebration, and special occasions, not an everyday drink. Modern archaeological analysis of ancient pottery has found pomegranate residue in ceremonial vessels, confirming its use in important contexts. 8. Fig drink. While not explicitly called a beverage in Scripture, figs were processed into drinks in the ancient world. Figs were one of the 7 species and incredibly important to ancient Israelite diet. They were eaten fresh, dried, pressed into cakes, and processed into various forms. Fig-based beverages. Fig nectar juice pressed from fresh figs, fig wine fermented fig juice, fig syrup mixed with water, dried figs soaked in water to create a sweet drink. Some scholars suggest the honey in milk and honey might include fig nectar, not just date syrup. Figs naturally produce a sweet, sticky substance when pressed, similar to honey. The Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts describe fig wine as a common beverage. Given cultural exchange with these civilizations, ancient Israelites likely produced fig drinks too. Dried figs were carried by travelers and soldiers. Soaking them in water created a sweet, energy-rich drink, practical for journeys through arid regions. 1 Samuel 25:18 mentions Abigail bringing David 100 cakes of raisins and 200 cakes of figs. These pressed fig cakes could be eaten solid or dissolved in water for drinking. 9. Raisin drink. Raisins, dried grapes, appear frequently in Scripture, and they were used to make beverages. The process was simple. Raisins soaked in water created a sweet drink. If left longer, the mixture fermented into raisin wine. Biblical evidence. 2 Samuel 16:1 mentions raisin cakes given to David. Song of Solomon 2:5 requests, "Sustain me with raisin cakes." Hosea 3:1 references cakes of raisins in idolatrous worship. Raisin drinks served multiple purposes. For travelers, raisins were portable and lightweight. Soaked in water, they created a quick energy drink. The natural sugars provided rapid calories. Ancient winemakers sometimes used raisins to strengthen weak wines or restart stuck fermentations, a practice still used in traditional winemaking today. The association of raisin cakes with idolatry, Hosea 3:1, suggests they were used in pagan feasts, possibly including fermented raisin drinks as ritual beverages. Raisin wine was distinct from grape wine. It had a different flavor profile, sweeter, more concentrated, and could be made year-round from stored raisins rather than only during grape harvest. 10. Spiced wine. The Bible and ancient texts describe wines mixed with spices, herbs, and other additives. This wasn't just for flavor. Spices helped preserve wine, masked off flavors, and added medicinal properties. Common additives: honey, sweetener, and preservative; myrrh, offered to Jesus on the cross, Matthew 27:34. Spices: cinnamon, pepper mentioned in ancient texts; herbs, various aromatic plants; seawater, small amounts for flavor and preservation. Proverbs 9:2 mentions mixed wine in the context of wisdom's feast. Isaiah 5:22 condemns those who are heroes at mixing drinks. These references show spiced or mixed wine was common and could be done skillfully or excessively. The wine mixed with myrrh offered to Jesus before crucifixion was likely an analgesic. Myrrh had pain-dulling properties. He refused it, choosing to face death fully conscious. Archaeological analysis of residues in ancient wine jars has found traces of tree resins, herbs, and spices, confirming biblical and textual references to mixed wine. We've explored 10 beverages that appear throughout Scripture, drinks that ancient Israelites consumed daily, that Jesus himself would have known. These weren't exotic or unusual. They were the normal drinks of everyday life in ancient Israel, shaped by climate, agriculture, and available technology. Wine wasn't like modern wine. It was diluted, lower in alcohol, and drunk for safety as much as pleasure. Milk wasn't pasteurized. It soured quickly and was consumed as curds or yogurt. Water wasn't abundant. Every well, every spring was precious and protected. What strikes me most is how archaeology validates scripture. Ancient wine cellars confirm wine's importance. Pottery residues show spiced wines existed. Historical texts describe the same beverages mentioned in the Bible. The people who wrote scripture weren't mythologizing. They were describing real drinks, real practices, real daily life. When Jesus turned water into wine at Cana, everyone there knew what wine was, how it was made, how it tasted. Understanding these historical realities doesn't diminish scripture. It enriches it. It grounds biblical narrative in human experience, in real people living real lives in a specific time and place. If this historical approach resonates with you, subscribe to Rooted Knowledge. We're exploring the material reality behind ancient texts, archaeology, history, and scripture working together. Thank you for this journey. Until next time, may your cup overflow whether with wine, water, or the milk and honey of abundance.